Welcome to Behavior Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers and other interesting people to unlock the mysteries of our behavior by using a behavioral science lens.
In this episode, we are sharing an intriguing conversation with Elaine Lynn Herring, the author of a new book called Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, which looks at the pervasive and negative influence that silence has and how we can begin to dismantle it in order to find our voices at home and at work.
Yeah. For many of us, we grew up in a world where we were encouraged to just speak up, but it's really never that easy. And Elaine helps us see that as a facilitator who has helped companies build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. She's worked with mental health professionals, political officials, religious communities, and leaders at companies including American Express, Google, Nike, and Novartis, among many others. Now, in addition to earning her law degree from Harvard, Elaine is a former managing partner at Triad Consulting Group, and she is now a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, specializing in dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation.
In this conversation, we discuss the importance of finding and using your unique voice and being determined to unlearn silence in this crazy world. Elaine shares some important personal experiences, both as a woman and as a lawyer, and examines the complexities of silence in personal and professional life. She also addresses the time to speak up and the value of reflecting and processing your thoughts and feelings in a non-reactive manner.
We also explore the impact of power dynamics and societal norms on communication preferences, our individual wiring and mental health, and how more inclusive environments where everyone's thoughts and contributions are valued end up creating more productive workplaces. In the end, like many issues, silence is a systemic issue that can be remedied by good leadership.
100% agree with that. And with that, we now hope that you sit back with a nice loud brew of speaking up and enjoy our conversation with Elaine Lynn Herring.
Elaine Lynn Herring, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure, and we're grateful that you are spending your Friday with us today. We would like to know, first and foremost, maybe one of the most important questions we'll ask today is coffee or tea?
Coffee.
That was pretty confident, pretty direct.
If you want the nuance, because we can go there, it's also 9 a.m. local time. So there's a little bit of time bias. Evening would be tea, but in this moment, coffee.
Oh, coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like
Undoctored.
that.
Plain.
No.
Black.
None of this like oat milk, almond milk, soy milk. I don't have time for that.
You and my wife are like cut from the same cloth.
I don't have time for that. I like that. I like the fact that I can't take the extra 10 seconds to put the creamer in.
Right.
That means you are busy.
Oh,
That. Yeah.
The act of self-care is actually to have coffee that someone else made for me, rather than I went through the motions today to pour the hot. It's not a whole lot of effort, but it all adds up.
So you don't necessarily need the ritual side of making coffee yourself, right? Anybody could make coffee for you.
I would love if a listener or either of you are offering to make me coffee daily, you are more than welcome. I don't even have high standards for my coffee.
Okay.
So we drank Folgers, like the freeze-dried stuff, for a long time. My relationship, there you go, cheers. My relationship with coffee is I stayed away from coffee and caffeine most of my life because my brother started drinking coffee early and was addicted. Like headaches would kick in, could not function. Whenever we traveled, we had to go find coffee first. And I was like, I am not going to become like you. And then I went to law school. and maybe the story.
I think we know where the story goes from there.
That's the rest of the story.
And then I worked at a law firm, and it was when Keurig had just come out. I'm dating myself, and there are all these different flavors. And so, of course, you had to try all the flavors.
Yeah. I think Keurig actually just came out like in 2020. So, pretty recently. Yeah. No.
I don't know. I haven't had enough coffee today to do the calculation.
Okay, all right.
All
This
right.
is supposed to be a speed round. We could talk. I don't want to spend the entire conversation talking about coffee.
But that's good.
So second speed round question. Would you prefer to have dinner with your favorite musician or your favorite actor or actress?
Musician.
See, that one was not nearly as fast of a response.
No.
You thought about that
as
Yeah.
your coffee. All right, so
I think having actually thinking through things is a useful practice in life.
You're so strange
Tim,
that way.
did you hear that? Tim, did you hear that? Because that's probably, I think it was pointed.
I think it was pointed at me. I got the
I
message.
was not looking at either one of you, I promise.
That's okay. We understood with ourselves.
Did anybody come to mind, by the way, when you said musician?
I have such a complicated relationship with music. So I grew up as a choral singer. One of my majors in college was vocal performance. I taught piano to pay for college. And so it feels like there are such high expectations of who I would know and my musical ability. And there's a reason I am not a musician day to day. I could not make a living off of it. So I have incredible respect and feel like I should have people that I'm dying to meet. And I mean, who doesn't want to meet Beyonce? Yeah.
Wouldn't she be a fantastic dinner guest? Yeah.
I think so.
I think so too. Yeah. I don't think you'd have to sell anybody on that one. I think she's smart and
Sure.
accomplished and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, there's that and Yo-Yo Ma. So it's a big range.
See, now, wouldn't that be great as two dinner companions? Yo-Yo Ma and Beyonce at the same dinner table, and have
I actually want to see that collaboration.
Oh, that would be, with the she just went into the country kind of, genre. So maybe
classical is next.
Classical is next,
Who knows?
All right.
Okay. Next speed round question. We want to kind of lean towards the book here. So does being silent when you want to speak up lead us to doubt ourselves?
Yes.
Okay.
Again,
Yeah.
no hesitation there. We will talk about that
okay.
in more detail as we go into. And the last speed round question. So when I was growing up, my parents used to tell me, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Is that good advice that they gave me? Or should I be thinking about that differently now?
So that line is actually in the book because watching Bambi as a kid taught me the same thing. So I'm not sure whether your parents got it first or Bambi got it first. We could trace that lineage. My challenge with that advice is who gets to determine what is nice?
Yes.
Who gets to decide what is nice? Because my truth, my lived experience, my perspective may be offensive to you, but it doesn't diminish the reality that it is my lived experience and perspective. So if I need to conform to your definition, and who gets to decide gets us into power and identity and systems and structures. And this is the speed round. So I heard.
No, but this is the last question.
Okay,
so we can just run into the
Keep rolling.
regular session right here. So please
I
keep
love
talking.
it. We're going to go. Your parents, I think, get at the crux of this challenge and of the book, which is there's such good intention, I believe, behind that advice. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. We want people to be kind. We want people to be thoughtful. I think all of that is true. And who gets to decide what is nice is the crux of the question. What are the norms? What is appropriate? What is professional? All of that gets us into really messy territory. It also connects this piece of I'd have never met anyone who said, I want to silence you, or a leader who says anything, but I'm here to support my team. I want to bring out their best talent. I want people to thrive. And yet I've done enough diagnostic calls and worked with enough teams that that's not how their direct reports or team members experience them. So how do we close the gap between the good intention that your parents had and most leaders had and the not always so good impact that we end up having on each other that frankly is frustrating for everyone.
The book that we are talking about is about being silenced. And I think it'd be good for listeners to get your definition of what are you talking about when you say silence or being silenced? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because silence, people say you wrote a book called Unlearning Silence. You must be against silence. And I'm like, no, there's more nuance to it all. Yeah. We need that pause. Not that we're talking about Tim, but the pause between stimulus and response to be thoughtful and insightful and to be reflective rather than reactive. Right? All of those things are true. That meditative silence, that intentionality, all of that is great. The silence I'm talking about unlearning is when there's not enough room in the relationship or conversation for you, for your thoughts, feelings, needs, and preferences. When you need to self-censor, to edit out parts of yourselves to be accepted. When you have a seat at the table, but you aren't actually heard for what you really think, but are used as window dressing or as a token. It's also that self-censorship where we don't end up saying anything because the voices in our head have already told us that it's dumb and not useful and not value add. And all of that is really messy and most often unconscious. So it becomes habitual of, oh, I guess I'm not worthy here. I guess it's just me. And because we're not talking about it, we internalize the problem as everyone else has presented it, which is if you're not speaking up, if you're not getting heard, the problem is you. If you could have more courage, have more confidence, if you could fix yourself, then you would be heard, then we could promote you, then life would be grand. And to me, that's the wrong question and wrong diagnosis. The question is, what role does silence play in each of our lives? What silence have I learned from my different life experiences, from how I was raised, from the look that my manager shot me when I tried to say something, even though he told me to speak up? In what ways do the people around me continue to reinforce those norms and silence my thoughts, my contributions? And then in what ways is silence baked into the systems that we're all a part of, the policies and practices? We're all so tired, I imagine, about talking about return to office, right? Are we doing hybrid? Are we doing this? How many days a week? And to me, the reason that's such a lightning rod issue is because the policy of you have to be in the office, even though substantively you have performed and can show that that work can happen, supports certain people who are used to working in person, know how to lead in person, whose commutes are short and have less caregiving responsibilities. And it silences people who benefit from that flexibility of I can press a load of laundry, right? Get that. My life works because I'm working from home. Can we be intellectually honest about who our policies and practices support and who they silence instead of assuming we're all similarly situated and experience the world in the same way?
You come to this with a Juris Doctor.
Sure.
You are a lawyer.
I learned to drink coffee, yes.
You learned to drink coffee. And when we think about policies, when I think about HR departments in corporations, I tend to think of we have to come up with a policy that is to some degree one size fits all. It's sort of got to apply to everybody. Mm-hmm. Is your stance somewhat, or how does this conversation fit into that?
I think that's absolutely true. And we also need to be intellectually honest about the role of HR and what we intend to do, what impact we're trying to have with those policies.
Yeah.
The world cannot run on consensus, so not everyone is a decision maker. That's one of the flaws and pitfalls we run into when, we want to be inclusive, and so we ask people for their opinion. The reality is not everybody can be a decision maker. The role of HR, as I have come to understand it, is to protect the best interests of the company. Mm-hmm. Which is often a someone threw cold ice water on me.
I think there's a lot of listeners who are going, what?
Yeah, no, they're in agreement with that. Yeah.
That is the role. And also for HR people who went into it thinking, I'm a people person. I want to develop people. I am here for people. And when it comes down to the functional role, it is to protect the interests of the company, which can be really disillusioning and disorienting. And so to me, it's not we can't be running a world based on exceptions, but can we be really honest about what we're trying to build and whether our policies and practices actually support that world? Because the disconnect between proclaimed values, the ones that we did in an offsite and that live in some document that no one references, that is maybe on the subcategory of our website somewhere.
Oh yeah, they're on the website. Absolutely.
And we wordsmith them, right? We had someone in comms work really hard on them or pay someone external for it. But that disconnect between stated values and actual impact is where we erode trust.
So let's dig into that, because as you said, it's on the website. It might be on a poster up in the office somewhere.
If we're going into the office.
Right? It might be on the screensaver when we're not. Yes. There you go. All of those different pieces. And you said earlier too, it's like you've never heard somebody say, I want to silence you. And most managers, if you ask them, and I think they truly do want to make sure that again, there's exceptions to every rule, but for most people, they want to have the input. They want to make sure that you are being heard, yet we do things that inhibit that. And so I think that obviously there's two sides, as you said. There's the people who are being silenced, and then there's the people who are in that position of power who might be silencing, purposely or without purpose. So what are some of the things that lead people to feel like they're being silenced or to be being silenced? That maybe, like, if I was a manager and I don't want to do this, what do I need to be aware of? What should I be thinking about in my own actions? Like you already talked about the eye roll when I said something, but what are some other things?
So chapter 5 parses out 9 different ways that we end up silencing other people. Let's do 2 that are really low-hanging fruit. One is, if we don't struggle with speaking up, maybe because we're outgoing, we've always spoken up, it wouldn't cross my mind that this would be hard for someone. We fundamentally underestimate how difficult it can be for someone else to share their thoughts. And that comes from identities, that comes from culture. I'll own my own story. I'm the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan to the United States. So by nature, I am less than, because boys or men are more prized in the culture that I come from. To question anyone who is older than me, particularly if they're male, is to be disrespectful. And then I grew up in the Christian church, which was turn the other cheek, be the bigger person, essentially let everything go, even if it's damaging to you, which is a whole other conversation. But those are some ways that I learned to stay silent and created this struggle of, they're telling me to say something, but then when I said something, I was told that I was too loud, I was too quiet, I was too smiley, I was too stoic, right? I'm just not right. And we then internalize that message. What has been fascinating is to facilitate conversations amongst leadership teams and have them share their own relationship with silence with each other and realize, I had no idea it was hard for you or challenging for you, because I've never had a problem speaking up. So that just blind spot of, if we pause and think about it, it makes sense. We're all wired differently, have different life experiences. Of course, we would experience doing something, any skill, like speaking up differently. But day to day, our human nature is to say, well, I don't have a problem with it. Why would it be hard for you? So what leaders can do is just remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard, right? Because these leaders, these managers are coming to their jobs with a wiring, with a epigenetic disposition and the context that they grew up in. All of that is playing into their role. When we are the employee and have the manager who is not doing a terribly good job, should we just basically gather up our gumption and sit down at the manager's desk and say, you suck? to pull a quote from your book.
Yeah, I specifically prescribe not doing that.
Right, exactly.
Let's be really clear that unlearning silence for the avoidance of doubt. Let's go a little later. For the avoidance of doubt, unlearning silence does not mean saying everything everywhere all the time to everyone. The world is far too noisy and complex for that.
Yes.
That's also why chapter 3 is when silence makes sense, because there are good reasons why we stay silent. But Tim, I'm so glad you raised wiring, because wiring and the failure to recognize not just the mindset and lived experience, but that we each are wired differently is another way that leaders end up silencing the people they lead. If we do not actively design the ways that we communicate, right? Are we talking by Zoom? Are we talking in person? Are we typing versus talking? What time of day are we having our one-on-ones? If we're not actively designing that, we default to the communication preferences of the people with the most organizational or institutional power. If a leader is making those decisions, it might not be, oh, I intend that you have to do things my way. I just typically, human nature is I haven't paused to think about, have we optimized the way we're communicating the mediums for voice? Maybe it's just habit, right? This is how my leader did it with me. Therefore, I am replicating it with you. Versus if we think, number one, acknowledge that wiring is powerful, and differences in wiring shouldn't mean weakness. Too often in our workplaces, people who can speak in 3 succinct bullet points, no ums, just the right amount of emotion to show that you care, but not too much emotion that you lose credibility, are identified as having leadership potential or executive presence. That cuts out an entire swath of people who are wired differently. You know, one of my favorite observations is that there are people who process in real time, right? Let's talk it out. The more we talk, the more it's going to become clear. And then there are people who are post-processors. In the meeting, I can't quite figure out what to say, but 20 minutes later, that's what I wanted to say. Or someone said to me the other day, it's not 20 minutes, it's a day and a half, and it's when I'm in the shower.
For me, it's about 2 a.m. when I wake up and I'm going, that was what I should have said right then.
Yes. And if we as leaders want not just the loudest or quickest ideas, but the best, how do we design the way we work together to bring in Kurt's 2 a.m. thinking? Because that is where innovation is going to come from. That is where we're going to be able to course correct early on versus this one slot on our calendars is over. Therefore, we're moving on. And to me, this is maybe, it can be a 2-minute conversation in a one-on-one that allows you to recognize, oh, we all hate talking. Yeah. Why don't we move this to Slack? Or we all hate Slack. Let's do this. Or, you know what? You think better by typing. I think better by talking. So that in our next meeting, we'll say, here's where we are. Here's our placeholder decision. Let's all sleep on it. And as people post-process, so notice that we're normalizing our different wiring. As people post-process, put things in this Slack thread for us to pick up together, right? We are actively designing to get people's best thinking based on how they're wired, rather than forcing people to communicate to us as leaders in the way that we are most used to, which may not actually be the way that best serves us, but is potentially just habit.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about social dynamics and how do social dynamics, so we're talking about some wiring and genetic dispositions and various different things, but how do the social dynamics contribute to the kind of perpetuation of silence, and what can we do to maybe challenge some of those?
How do the social dynamics not influence silence? So in this aspect, let's take one use case, which is silence breeds silence.
Okay.
If I am new to an organization, new to a team, new to a family system, we by human nature observe, how do things work around here? And there is wisdom to that, right? Your first 30, 60, 90 days, you're often in observation mode. How do things work around here? And we as human beings tend to mimic the dominant behaviors that we see, because people who coach on influence and write on influence say that people tend to like and want to say yes to and want to work with people who look and sound like them. So that mimicry makes sense. So we're trying to fit in. And there's a lot of gravity toward that. So if I'm looking around and I notice Tim doesn't talk directly to Kurt, Tim goes and talks with everybody else about the beef that he has with Kurt. Okay.
I think you're just kind of nailing it there, Elaine.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. I don't know how you picked up on that so quickly, but that was good.
I hate to break it to you. This is an intervention. We love the two of you and want to keep the two of you together.
So I've been so wanting this for so long.
I'm here for you. Right? If that's the pattern we observe, I very naturally draw the conclusion, I guess we don't talk about things here, or at least not directly to the person. What we do here, quote unquote, is we talk to everybody else and we vent, and then we deal with the illusory truth effect, which thinks that makes us believe that we've actually had the conversation with Kurt when we haven't. But those social dynamics, we are all observing what happens. Silence breeds silence. The converse is what is more hopeful, which is voice breeds voice. If we see people having constructive dialogue, or we hear stories that, in our closed door leadership meeting, we had a rigorous debate about this. This is what we turned over in conversation. Then we have data points in our data set that say, oh, we do talk about these things here. All of that can either contribute to perpetuating or disrupting organizational silence, which is the collective phenomenon of saying nothing, right? As we look around, what are other people doing? And the Australians would say tall poppy syndrome. I don't want to stick out too much. And I don't want to bear the interpersonal cost for an unknown, unguaranteed collective gain if I offer the suggestion or the change. So I'd argue we each have a role in what culture are we co-creating, because it really just takes one person to say, I see it differently. Different doesn't mean you're wrong. Different just means different. Different means I sit here in this body of mine with the identities and life experiences and my sales experience, and you sit there with your engineering experience, and we're going to see things differently. And in surfacing those thoughts, we might have, or we will have, a better likelihood of getting to a good outcome. But if we stay in silence, there's no information exchange or flow.
If I hear you correctly, it's not just the leaders or the managers. It's also everybody on the team, everybody in the workplace. You mentioned intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw's fantastic thesis. And where you're kind of calling people to just show up, right? Be who you are, right? Am I reading that right to some degree?
I am. And some of it is my legal background. So I'm going to have to, it depends is my favorite answer. Which is why I'm surprised I didn't bring that up in the lightning round. It is true that we all have a role. And it is true that power tends to be invisible to the people who have it. So we fundamentally underestimate the power that we have while focusing on the power we don't have. And leaders have a disproportionate impact on culture. Mm-hmm. You can talk about a grassroots, everybody use your voice, but if you're going to hit a essential or figurative brick wall, or that goes against the grain of what leadership, and leadership could be anyone on the C-suite or the CEO. Often CEOs say to me, well, my hands are tied, the board won't let me. And everyone else is saying, if the CEO doesn't have power, then the rest of us are screwed.
Precisely.
Right. So what power do we have? And also our own analysis of, does it make sense for me to use my voice here? Because we each have a limited amount of energy and bandwidth, and only we know what we're carrying and what costs we and our family systems can stomach. So there's a lot of it depends there. Each of us has a role in systemic change, and each of us has the opportunity to influence culture, and leaders have a disproportionate impact.
So with that, as an individual, whether I be a leader or somebody without as much power within an organization, mm-hmm. How can individuals create environments that foster open communication and lead to a better outcome for the whole? How can we do that?
Yeah, I do think the advice is similar, which is realizing that we have a choice. So often as we are going through the world in autopilot and our habits, and, we all carry far too much in life, right? We're like answering emails at red lights. Maybe that's just me, and don't report me.
Maybe it is just you, but maybe not.
Yeah. Statistically speaking, it's not just me.
It's not just you, right? Yeah.
We forget, though, that we could choose different ways because we know what we know. And in the book, I talk about dealing with the devil that you know rather than uncertainty and change and the fear and the disorientation that comes with that. So we actually forget that we have agency to try something different. And to me, for an individual, it would be an honest analysis and conversation with yourself of what are my values? Am I living in alignment with my values, right? Fundamentally, is my life working for me? And if not, how might I change that? And chapters 6 and 7 of Finding and Using Your Voice are really focused on that. What do I do? One specific thing, actually, let's do two. You'll allow me. One is, do I even remember that I have a voice? Because if my job is fundamentally to solve for what my manager wants, to toe the company line, or at home is to make my spouse happy, I forget that I could think for myself, that I fundamentally would have thoughts, feelings, needs, concerns, goals, and hopes of my own because my job for so long has just been to solve for everyone else. So there's internal work to just be asking, even as you're listening to a podcast or reading an article, sitting in a meeting, what do I think? And that really slowly reminds you, oh, I do have thoughts of my own, which often begs the question of, okay, what do I want to to do about it?
So, all right. I'm sorry. I
love it. You're both like,
because it's like, Tim and I are who's gonna get the question in here.
You win, Kurt.
I jump first here. When you talk about that because it resonates with me, because as we talked about earlier, oftentimes it's that 2 a.m. of reflecting back on that to go, oh, this is actually what I think about. This situation and not in the moment. And you may not have any insight on this, and that's fine. But what can I do? How, because I do that. I do process things. Yeah. In a different, not real time often, which is surprising when I'm on a podcast or interviewing people all the time and or trying to respond. But I do that. Is there any advice that you can give me to help me?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay,
totally.
Great.
So number one, own that wiring. Yeah. Rather than trying to change ourselves, right? There's such gravity to say you are a better person if you can process real time. That is often the message we get. Instead, I would notice, what are the natural habits and patterns you've identified 2 a.m. and how do I let the people around me know that this is how I'm wired? This is how I do my best thinking. So next time I could imagine Tim saying, all right, Kurt, actually don't tell me what you really think right now. Wait until you've had a 2 a.m. cycle or two and let's pick this up next Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Just fantastic. Understanding that I don't think Kurt isn't listening to me. I don't think Kurt doesn't care. I just think, well, Kurt needs his time. He can do his thing. And that is awareness for everybody else, which leads us to the second thing we can each do. The more awareness you have, the more you can make clear asks to the people around you. And the more you make clear asks to the people around you, the more likely they can actually support you in a way that you can receive the support and care. This is love languages, right? Sort of at a big scale, but so many of us have good intention, right? It's like, I want to support Tim. I actually just don't know exactly how in the moment. And it's certain, sometimes I don't know the best way that someone can support me because that's work to do. Yeah. But if you have awareness of, I just need to vent right now. Advice right now is not welcome. Oh, wait, no, I am looking for advice now, right? Yeah. It's really hard for someone on the outside to read you. And so going back to 2 a.m., one last thought is also, just because the meeting has ended doesn't mean you've missed your shot. So I could imagine many a conversation where you say, I was thinking about this last night at 2 a.m. And what came up for me is fill in the blank. And I wanted to be sure to share that with you. and see what people say. And over time, my guess is that people like, Kurt, what came up for you at 2 a.m.? Because if that's when you do your best thinking, that's what I want. And you can circle back, right? You can circle back after the meeting. If you circle back after the meeting and say, I was thinking about it, you don't have to disclose whether it was in bed or in the shower. Sometimes that's too much information based on our context. But as I was reflecting on our meeting, this is what I noticed, or this is what came up for me. The impact being on the receiving end of that is, oh, wow, you're so thoughtful.
Yeah.
You cared enough to continue to think about it rather than, oh, you're weak. You couldn't come up with that thought in the moment. And then we start to normalize that we're all different.
Elaine, I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Elaine, your book is titled Unlearning Silence.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a JD. You've taught at world-class universities. You stand in front of huge groups of people all the time. You write in the book, some people have kind of looked at you and said, how could you have ever been silenced? You're like this incredibly powerful woman. Like, how could that ever be? And yet other people have looked at you and said, well, of course you've been silenced. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious about what's the percentage? Do you have a feel for like how often people are going, oh, I so get you, and see where you're coming from on that? And how often are people saying, that's just ridiculous because look at where you're at?
I would say that those reactions fall very clearly across a couple of lines. The more subordinated identities you carry, so being a woman in a male-dominant environment, being non-white in a very white context, you add in class, ability, education, socioeconomic, all those factors, right? If you carry more subordinated identities, you are more likely to have been silenced over time. So it has been fascinating to watch the range of reactions from people saying, hold on, I need a minute. Like the title of your book, Unlearning Silence is a thing. It is a learned thing. I can unlearn it wholly. Like my mind is blown. Get it immediately. To, what? Silence? What? And the font on your book makes it look like we're unlearning science. So what's up with all of that? That's not feedback for the cover designer, right? I didn't catch it either, but it has come up. And it tends, the people who have been silenced, I've been so honored to hear so many stories.
Yeah.
Really deep stories of abuse, of trauma, of not feeling heard, seen, or known. And that was one of the primary goals of the book of, it wasn't you. It's not because you're deeply flawed or not enough in life. It is that we have learned silence and the systems prioritize certain voices over others. And we each have a role to play in that. So it has been fascinating to see. And I think my own case is a really good one to just say, there's often a disconnect between what we see of people on the outside and what they're carrying on the inside or how they experience it. And to remember that, right? What we see on the outside leads us very naturally as human beings to draw assumptions and conclusions about them as a person. And we actually know very little about each other. And that is certainly true of my own experience. So someone asked me, how did you unlearn silence? And I was like, no. Read the title. It's Unlearning, ING.
Right.
Right. I spent my career, a lot of my experiences were teaching other people's thoughts, concepts, frameworks, my colleagues out of the Harvard Negotiation Project. And I believe there's value and validity to that work. I also started to notice some people still don't negotiate or have the difficult conversations or give and receive feedback after they've paid a ton of money to attend this workshop, What Gives, which is how I landed on the insight of silence. And if we really want to unlock that potential to negotiate, to have the difficult conversations or give and receive feedback, we need to solve for silence. But there was also a personal aspect of it. I didn't actually think I was an effective facilitator or speaker or had much value of my own. I thought my value in the room, what people were paying for, came from propagating someone else's ideas. And if we had an all-white male speaker lineup, I was a pretty good token diverse speaker.
Wow.
right? And it took other people saying to me, Elaine, we don't want the founders of the firm. We don't want your business partners. We don't want the authors, not because their rates are higher, but because you have unique insights, values, the way you hold a room. And I was like, really? But that also, it still surprises me.
Wow.
That, I wrote a book and people read it. Not just my mom, it is mind blowing. And people are like, I can't put it down. And this is life changing. And I'm like, it's such a meta level conversation of unlearning silence. In the beginning of this process, did not believe that I had a voice. And certainly publishing is predominantly white. And I went into the process thinking, I just need one publisher to be interested. And then 16 were, and the book went to auction and we sold global rights. And I went, what is happening here? But then I look around at the issues of our day. I look at teams and organizations. We won't talk about Boeing right now, but what happens, right? When you silence each other, there are real deep consequences that do so much damage. And if we can diagnose the situation more accurately, instead of saying, go fix yourself, you're the problem, to say we collectively need to solve for silence, we have a much better chance of honoring the dignity of every human being and building worlds that we can actually all thrive in.
Elaine, fantastic. Just really insightful as you talked about that and brought your own component into it. This idea like, hey, it's unlearning. It's not unlearned, right? It is a process of continual kind of making sure that you're practicing this. In the book, and I'm going to quote here because this is a really great line. It says, you wrote, being the only, and I put air quotes around the only, in any context is a special kind of low-grade pain. You contort yourself to fit in because fitting in seems like a ticket to acceptance, unquote. And that's what you wrote.
That's gold, by the way. That's gold. Yeah.
It seems like a completely universal statement. So how do we get around the social norms and the pain that people feel of being the only?
In case listeners aren't thinking about how damaging social isolation is day to day. And hopefully that's not the only thing you think about, because that would be a really hard place to stay. Yeah. Right. But the Surgeon General in the United States and so many others have done fantastic research on this, social isolation being comparable to smoking and obesity in terms of shortening one's lifespan, loneliness, lots of cardiovascular challenges, having to hide part of your own identity keeps your nervous system on chronic high alert. And so for me, it was hives, hair loss, and insomnia. So all of that is to say, how do you solve for the only? It is to break that silence so that you aren't having to suffer in silence. I use a Mario Kart analogy in the book about the double pain badge, right? There are things that are deeply painful. Losing your job is painful. The shame of not being able to talk about it or feeling like you can't talk about it, feeling like you've got to keep up the image that everything is fine when the world is not fine and you're not fine is another pain. That to me is the double pain.
Yeah.
Things are always going to happen. We can't live in a life or a world free of those initial pains, but we can reduce or minimize the double pain that comes with social isolation of thinking I'm the only one. It's a me problem rather than it's a systems problem, or this is a really hard season of life because of fill in the blank reasons. I love that you picked up on the universality of it, because that certainly has been my experience. And so how can we reduce the social isolation? It is being able to share, right? The Me Too movement came about because someone said something and literally other people said, oh, me too. And then we can see it more accurately. This is systemic, or this is a pattern, or this is a policy. And we don't internalize it as I am fundamentally flawed. And as we look around at our day-to-day, on my team, I still may be the only woman on that team, given the current dynamic. So, who else in the world, this community, LinkedIn for me has just been a gold mine of, oh my gosh, there's so many of us. And we all live the same fact pattern. And we all think it is because we're not good enough, because that's the message that we have gotten from other people, right? If you were strong enough, if you were more skilled, if you were this or you were that, then you would still be there. And being able to see it more accurately and know that it's not you allows us, again, to have a more honest and clear-minded analysis of what's going on here, including what choices do I make going forward.
That was just beautifully said. And I just want to express my gratitude, and I think I can speak for Kurt here, in just your openness about your own story is it's something to be honored. And so thanks for doing that. I love that you brought up that you were a choral singer, because music is an important part of behavioral grooves, right? This is kind of one of the things that we do. And it's interesting that when we think about silence, we think about the absence of music, right? Or we could construe that as the absence of music. And I'm just kind of curious how you think about music and the role that music might play in, because we often use music to cue a mood or accentuate a mood or change a mood. How does music fit into the story overall, do you think?
Music speaks to the soul in a way that words often cannot. So when you're talking about cueing a mood, right? Absolutely. Mood lighting, mood music. Yeah. It also, to me, is in what ways is our day-to-day conception of voice incredibly narrow? When I talk about voice, I mean, we just defined silence. Voice to me is not just the words that you say in a meeting. Voice is how you move through the world. Mm-hmm. And we each need art, right? Music being one of the, each of our voices is going to look different. And I'm so grateful that artists and musicians have chosen to lean into an art that can often be stigmatized, right? How are you going to pay your bills?
Yeah.
And there's an economic structural piece to all of that, but also how much richer the world is because music exists, and music being able to honor a part of our humanity that critical thinking and legal analysis cannot. So I want to honor music and art as another way that we show up in this world, and how much richer and more whole are we each for it.
I think you have just given Tim a new mantra. The music speaks to the soul in ways that words cannot. I think he's going to put that might be on his gravestone when he is gone.
I don't want to wait that long.
If you're putting it on a sweatshirt line, on a mug line, we can talk about revenue splits later.
All my new T-shirts. Okay. Royal, exactly. You'll negotiate that.
Yeah, the lawyer in you. There you go. It's all perfect.
We are both and.
Yes,
this is the complexity of life.
That's right. Yes. So, following the music train, if you were to be isolated on a desert island for a year, and you could pick two musicians, their entire catalog, not in person, but their catalog of music to take with you, which two would you choose?
Miles Davis.
Ooh, yes.
Again, like words sometimes get in the way.
Yeah.
And then the other is Elevation Worship, which is a Christian band.
Fantastic.
And to me, there is we can be so technical and so logical, and to remember that there are forces and beings bigger than us, to me is really liberating. As much as, systemic change is really slow and we may not always get to see it. It doesn't happen on the pace that we want. That if we each are living, we are one valuable part of a bigger story. And so that reminder of we are bigger than, we're part of something bigger than ourselves helps keep me grounded. And I think I'd need that on a desert island for a year.
Oh, man.
And also, what are we eating on this island?
Oh, well, we're going to
full
have
buffet. This isn't like Survivor. You get the full, but you're in a comfy bed. You just, it's, there you go.
I had like Tom Hanks with the volleyball.
No.
You have a big, nice music system. You can,
good listening vibes.
That's what nobody's ever asked us that, Tim.
That's a really good question. When you said Miles Davis, I just thought, I might be able to spend a year just with like Kind of Blue and Sketches of Spain. Like I could
completely.
live maybe just 2 records, not even.
I could do Kind of Blue.
Yeah, just right. Just maybe the whole year on just that one record. Oh my God. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Elaine Herring, it is such a joy to have you as a guest. We are so pleased and so grateful. Thanks for being a guest today on Behavioral Grooves.
This was a joy. Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me tell my story. Thank you for hearing my story.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Elaine, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our loud and speaking up brains.
Yeah. Speaking up brains. We need that. We need to have that speaking up space, and we need to have that speaking up ability, and we need to have that speaking up delivery. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple key things I took from Elaine's conversation. The first, though, is obviously that we are often silent when we need to speak up. And I know for myself, that's true, right? I am a Midwestern born and bred guy. And
which means what? What does that mean? I mean, how does that translate into this conversation about silence?
Because it really, there is, I mean, we talk, and Elaine talked about this. There are many things. Silence is learned. There's a part of it that's learned from our parents. There's a part of it that is learned from the community and the society that we are embraced in. And then there are systemic and other factors that come into this, as well as our individual kind of insecurities and various different pieces that come from that. When I'm talking about being Midwest, we are known kind of from that community and societal part of saying, we are nice. We don't rock the boat. We keep things close to our vest. We don't share everything that is going on inside of our head. Mm-hmm. That we will talk about people after they leave, not necessarily confront them in the moment, as kind of opposed to and again, these are all generalities, but it's opposed to that East Coast, New York, New Jersey, you pissed me off. I'm going to be right up in your face. We're going to be talking about this and we're going to go through that. I remember very distinctly a time with a client. I was 30 years old, 29 years old, still Midwestern kind of guy. And I was on the phone with this client and they just started berating me, swearing and just going like, this is unacceptable. And, F-bomb this and you screwed up here and all of this for the first 5 minutes of this conversation on the phone. And rightfully so in some of the work, right? The work wasn't done to the level that the client was expecting it, but it was very in your face, raw. Mm-hmm. But then like 5 minutes was done. He had shared this and then it was just like, let's move on. And I was sitting there just aghast. I couldn't, you just berated me and it felt like everything was horrid. And I had to learn to overcome that and to say, you know what, that's the communication style that this client brought to the world. And it didn't mesh well with how I had been raised. But this was just the way that it was. And so, the Midwestern in me kind of wilted. And today I'm still a Midwestern at heart and kind of have some of that, but I will not wilt as much.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, the personal side comes in the form of imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know if I have enough to rebut that or speak to that, or I don't know if my argument is well crafted enough, or I don't know if I'm enough of an authority. And those are the kinds of things that come to mind for me when I think about why would I not speak up? I think that there's many of those reasons, but they kind of seem to center on more of just, I'm not sure if I'm enough. And I really liked our conversation with Elaine because she says you're enough.
Yeah. You are enough. That's very true. Very, very true. And this is the other interesting piece. And this was what she said. I found this really powerful, and yet there's a piece of this so I'll get to that. But this idea when we talked about this, again, my parents saying, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That was kind of ingrained in me. Right. And there's an aspect. And she said, this is the piece that I loved, quote, and who gets to decide what is nice? And that is the crux of the question.
Yeah. Who gets to decide what is nice? Yeah.
Because, this goes back to your imposter syndrome too. It's like you have a lived experience. You have a point of view. You have this reaction, this feeling, this response. And that shouldn't be diminished because you might not have the credentials or the authority or different pieces. That's true. That's true to you. It's true to all of us. And I get that and I hear that. And there is this element, and particularly within the power dynamics of our world. And, again, being white and male, I have a whole different world view that might, put this in a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
Because I see that and I hear that, but sometimes, and this is going to, again, go back to this, maybe this is where I need to really think about this a little bit more, but sometimes I feel like, don't we all just need to bite our tongue? do we have to
say everything that's on our mind? Like every single thing? Do
we have to always, like at every small, every time something passes through our brain, every small offense, every slight, do we have to always bring that out into the light?
Well, and I don't think Elaine is advocating for that.
I agree with that. I fully 100% agree with that.
Yeah. But you raise an important question, and you're raising it because we do see people in the world, and I don't mean to, I'm just not going to categorize, but there are people in the world who feel an obligation to right every wrong in every sentence. Like, wait a minute, that wasn't completely correct. It's like, I can be 90% correct and still have a point to make and not be 100% correct. And there can still be an exception. And we can talk about that. And yet, to some degree, I sometimes question, is it worth talking about the 10% that I wasn't correct about to the degree that it somehow equivocates the whole thing? It's like,
and I don't even know if I would go like the 90-10%. I would go it's kind of like, all right, we know this is like in a research project. This has a p-value of 0.5. It's 95% sure, but man, the impact value that it has is minuscule. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
the effect size is modest.
The effect size is modest. And so do we care?
Right.
And this is the piece where sometimes, and this is going way off of base from what I think Elaine was talking about here, but I think it's important for us to think about is, oftentimes by focusing and bringing things up, we enlarge the issue. In other words, the perceived slight that I felt because, somebody might have mentioned something about my lack of hair or something about something else, whatever it would be. There are times where maybe that raises the bar and yes, I need to say something about it. There are many times where if I just let that slide and it's not a pervasive thing that keeps coming up, that is continually there, I don't care. It's not
you can move on.
I can move on, and then the relationship is safe to a certain degree. Anyway, I know that Elaine is not advocating for raising things at every slight and different pieces. It is in those times where the effect size is big, and yet we still stay silent, and that I agree. So
well, and I think that this kind of gets to the solution side of it, is that we need to be reading the room for what is the effect size. We need to be thinking about if there is a team meeting and the leader is suggesting something And a couple of people are just jumping in line because it's like, that's the right ass kissing thing to do. But you really believe that it's not a good idea. And there are consequences. There's significant consequences to it. If there's no consequences to it, what the hell?
Yeah.
Just go with it.
It's a free roll, as Annie Duke would say. Roll those dice. Yes.
Exactly. It's a free roll. Let the free roll happen. But if there are meaningful consequences, that's when we need to just gather our gumption together and speak up and do it in our own way.
And do it in our own way, and do it in a way that's going to be heard in various different pieces. I think you raise a even larger issue, and I think this is a key piece that I want listeners, because many of our listeners are leaders within organizations and different pieces of this. And this idea of the systemic aspect, particularly within organizations, of towing the line, of having the boss say something and everybody follows suit, as opposed to pushing back. And we talked about this. I mean, we mentioned, Elaine mentioned this. She said, we're not going to talk about Boeing, right? But we should talk about Boeing.
Yes.
We should talk about the fact that there are people that were silent about some issues that caused some serious damage, and lives were lost on things. NASA, we go to the O-rings, and then a few years, like, all right, so people were silent about these O-rings and the temperature and raising that up. And it was like, no, we just have to get moving. And so people were silenced. And then a few years later, NASA did it again with the heat shields. And so like they didn't even learn, even though this was like a case study on people not speaking up. So we know it's hard, but there needs to be systemic elements from leadership to drive that home.
Yeah, because you can change the culture, and it's going to start with the head of the fish. It's got to start with leadership. It really, you need to be at the top, and that needs to be the idea of not, first of all, creating a psychologically safe environment for people to have these kinds of conversations where they can bring up concerns, especially when the consequences are grave.
Right.
That it is up to the leaders to help foster that. And that doesn't just have to be the CEO. You could be a leader of a team of 7 people, and you can foster that kind of openness and psychological safety to make it work.
I think the other piece of that is not just that it's okay to speak up and that you should speak up, but it's also understanding different people's speaking styles. We know there's extroverts that in a team meeting, they're going to be talking, they're going to be loud, they're going to, raise their hand, they're going to do others. And then there's introverts. And so how do you make sure that those introverts get in? Or for myself, I need to do this with my clients is, I go in as a consultant and, I'm working with senior leaders and they're expressing, here is the issues. What's our solution, Kurt? And the way that my brain processes things is sometimes I have a solution and sometimes I can say stuff or I can talk through it with them. But oftentimes my best thinking is late at night, or I wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. and I've processed it. And then I can come back to them with a much more full reasoned solution set for them. But if I don't set that expectation up in advance, so part of this is on me, right? Is this idea of saying, hey, here is how this works. And here's the process that we need to work through. So I'm building a process to get to the solution as opposed to the solution being the way that they've done it in the past with others and different pieces.
Right.
So understanding the individual differences of that. And I think that's what leaders need to understand too, is people process information different. They speak differently. They have different, elements of fear around speaking up or, historical kind of insecurities. As you said, if I feel like I'm imposter syndrome, I'm not going to speak up as much. So how do you set up the system in order to make sure that is mitigated as much as possible?
I've also found in the past couple of years how much more comfortable I am saying, hey, that's a really great question that you're asking. I'm a reflective thinker and I don't have an instant response for you, but give me 24 hours to think about that and I'll get back to you. And I'm surprised.
Can I steal that? I'm going to steal that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm
a reflective thinker. Give me 24 hours.
No one has said, no, you can't. No one said that. Not a single person. So
I love that. That is fantastic. I'm going to use that. I'm stealing that. All right.
Can I just say one other thing that I really loved that she talked about was the double pane idea.
The Mario Kart, this idea
Mario.
of,
I just thought there is, and I've experienced this, but this whole idea that there's the pain of the infraction and the pain of being silent. It's like, it's a double whammy. And Elaine called that out particularly well. And in a really, I guess, a really meaningful way to me.
And I think that's a key piece of this is you know what, as she talked about that initial infraction, the world is filled with those, right? You lose a job, somebody says something that pisses you off. And we have to live with that pain. What we don't have to live with is the pain that comes with the silence of feeling like we need to be silent about that. Like I can't talk about people that I don't have a job because that's not there, or can't say something about how this made me feel to this person, or write that, injustice because I'll get whatever. It was a wonderful piece. And I think again, as we're thinking about this, so listeners, I think there's a couple things, right? As an individual, understanding that, hey, we're often way too silent when we should be speaking up. And even though it's difficult, let's explore new ways to unlearn silence, because silence breeds silence. That was another thing that she said. And I love that idea. I don't love that idea, but it's true. And so explore your own style, try different approaches. Don't just fall back on the status quo, right?
And as a leader, I really want to encourage you to think about how you are creating a space for the people that you're working with to be able to speak up and voice their concerns, their issues, their questions, their curiosities, all the things that they might speak up about, to give them space to actually do that, because the data says your team will be more productive if they can feel more included and feel more psychologically safe.
And if you're like Tim or me, use that term. I'm a reflective thinker. Can you give me 24 hours? Oh, I love that. So, Tim, I thought for sure you were going to talk about her quote, which was, music speaks to the soul in ways that words cannot.
It's so sweet, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, that was like your face. For people you couldn't see Tim's face. Oh my gosh, it was like the biggest grin I think I've seen on you in years.
Yeah. It was ecstatic. It really was. And I couldn't agree with her more. It was a really fun conversation with Elaine. I'm glad that we have it. And Groovers, we hope that you are getting something out of this, and that we hope that you take these ideas this week as you go out and find your groove.